We love supporting and promoting the creators of musical theater throughout the world, and we would love to have your support as well. Go to musicaltheaterradio.com and click on the Become a Patron button, because a supportive community is a strong community. Welcome back to another episode of Be Our Guest here on Musical Theater Radio. I am your host, as always, Jean-Paul Jovanoff. Today, we are going to be talking to the creators of Top of the Heap, a show which we play on the station on our sampler platter, as well as the creators of Doug Live. Yes, the TV show Doug. And we're going to learn a little bit of what it's like to work for the mouse. Hopefully we'll get some secrets, maybe. Who knows? I want to welcome to the show Jeff Lodin and Bill Squier. Bill, welcome.
Hi, thanks for having us.
Awesome. So I want to get to know you guys before we delve into all that other stuff a little bit. So Jeff, we're going to start with you. We want to get Jeff's bio in 30 seconds. Who is Jeff in 30 seconds?
Jeff's an old man. I've been in New York for 40-something years. I am a music director, composer, arranger. Bill and I met at the BMI Musical Theater Workshop 3 decades ago, hit it off, started writing together. We are now on our 9th show. I also have some other shows I've written and have productions slated for this fall, if everything holds up.
Wonderful. And Bill, yourself in 30 seconds.
Well, much like Jeff, I've been around quite a while. Actually been involved in musical theater, in writing for musical theater as far back as, I was thinking about it this morning, high school, or I think I wrote my first original musical, although original in quotes, because it used existing music. There's a one-act version of the Hansel and Gretel tale called Witchy! ! And so, I'm a writer for a lot of different media. I also write for print, have done some television work in the past, but my passion has always been musical theater. And yes, as Jeff said, we met in the BMI workshop. Interestingly, didn't work together the first year, but one of our compatriots in the workshop said to us, "You guys should really do something together." And so the second year we collaborated on a project. In the second year of the workshop, you do something that lasts the full year. And that turned into Top of the Heap, ultimately.
Nice.
We took it from there. One little trivia fact about Jeff and I: we were born a day apart. We both have made birthdays a day apart. How about that?
And our sons are 10 days apart.
Yeah.
The stars aligned, and there's no way you two can have met. Let's be honest with this. Now, before we get into Top of the Heap and everything, and before these parallel lines of your lives converged, I want to know a little bit about yourself. So, Jeff, were you always into musical theater, and were you is it musical theater background, or were you the black sheep of the family? You were that artsy guy.
Oh, I was definitely the black sheep of my family, a lawyer, a doctor. My father sold insurance. My mother could not sing at all. And yet I've been playing piano for over 60 years.
And acting, too. He was an actor.
And I was a child actor. But they all sort of supported me. And so they think I'm nuts, but always supported me. And then when I came to New York and started music directing and met the first person I wrote shows with, there was a point where my father came up and asked me, do I want to take over his multi-million-dollar business? And all I have to do is go back to Miami and learn insurance. And I said, "No, Dad, I'm so sorry." And that was the end of that. But I know they lived vicarious through my failures and successes and came to all of our openings. And then I made commercials for 15 years. So had that odd little left turn in my career, but ultimately came back to the theater because this is what I love.
Do you think you could have, do you have a affinity for numbers and things like that? If you had said, you know what, I'm going into it. Do you think,
Yes.
do you have that? Oh, okay. So you have that skill set
There's
as
a
well.
parallel, I think, that can't be denied between music and math.
Oh, for
Yeah.
sure. For sure.
I've heard that.
And, you know, it always, just like when I sat down at the piano the first time, and my parents bought me a little Magnus chord organ where, you know, the buttons on the side, and I stopped using the buttons when I was 3 years old because I could just put my fingers and the chords made sense.
Yeah.
The same with math. I was always really fine in math. Of course, I've forgotten it all, and, you know, but that's okay.
Nice.
Yes,
and
I
Bill,
could.
and Bill yourself, were you the black sheep, or was that a family thing? The arts?
You know, again, much like Jeff, there had been people in my family background that were interested in the arts, and and an aunt who was very active in, you know, her local community theater. But my parents and brothers themselves were none of them were really inclined that way. I will give my father a bit of credit, though, for starting me down this path, because the one thing that we shared was a love for Gilbert and Sullivan operettas.
Nice.
And so he had a full set of the D'Oyly Carte recordings that I used to absolutely love. And of course, that really got me started, got my interest in writing lyrics. Because obviously the lyrics in those shows are so literate and so funny and so, you know, witty, that, you know, I fell in love with it from that point. But again, they were very supportive. No one ever questioned my decision-making about going into this as a career. And actually, you know, I look at all my family, everybody is very independent in the types of things that they've gone into. They're all their own bosses and make their own hours. So that part of it, I think everybody got right away.
Nice. So you're both on this path of the arts. You can see it. You're going. You're parallel. That moment when the two of you met each other, like you said, you weren't paired together, right, at the beginning.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
So what happened?
Well, I mean, if you know the BMI workshop, the whole first year is a series of exercises. Some people come in as composers and lyricists, and you know, don't collaborate with anyone else. But most of the workshop is made up of lyricists and composers that are looking for collaborators. Mm-hmm. And so you're paired with different people on each of the things that you do, with the idea being that you'll find people that you work well with and hopefully go on from there. And just by chance, we never worked together, but we got to see a lot of each other's work all year long. And one of the folks who was a writer who wrote both lyrics and composed, a lady by the name of Lynn Portis, both kind of pulled us aside at the second year approach and said, you guys should really think about working together. I think you really would get along well. I had a couple of different projects that I was looking at. And I talked to 3 different people, and Jeff was the only person who responded to the project that I was the most interested in writing. And so we said, yeah, well, let's give it a try, and took it from there. I knew I had my hands full, however, with him, because the very first song that we wrote for the show, I sweated over for, you know, like a week and a half. I brought it into the workshop. I gave a copy of it to Jeff and said, you know, here's something to take a look at, see what you could do. Walked home, and he was calling me because he had written it in the cab on his way home and already had a melody that pretty much, correct me if I'm wrong, exists to this day, you know, as was originally conceived.
Changed the note.
Wow.
Yeah. So we were off to a good start.
Nice. And Jeff, when Bill approached you and send this stuff, you know, sometimes it's, you know, you're meeting someone for the first time and you're starting to work with someone. Was it an easy collaboration? Like, is it not just Bill, but do you have a hard time working with other people, or do you find it easy? Or do you like to work on your own, or how did you find that experience?
Well, I'll start with the last question.
Yeah.
despise working on my own. Although writing is a very solitary, even with a collaborator, we are rarely, if ever, in the same room, particularly this year. But, so I am handed a set of lyrics, and sometimes inspiration just comes. Sometimes I may look at something, work for a little bit, and put it aside for 3 months until I'm ready to deal with that, that motion. Collaboration's about personalities and respect and being open to criticism, because I never expect everything I write to be perfect. I would almost be sad if nothing was changed, because there's always a way to make something better.
Yeah.
And the nature of collaboration is, being open to suggestions both ways. Now, very often, Bill, when he's coming up with a lyric, has a song in his mind, whether it be something he's concocted or pick a show that the moment of that song for what he's writing seems to fit. So he'll write it with that form, that general form, and then send it to me. I never know what that song is.
Yeah.
And very often what I come up with is so different than that song. And it's, which is always surprising for him. And sometimes it fits. Sometimes he needs to change his lyrics to match that. And sometimes he says, no, that's not quite right.
Yeah.
And I'll try something else. I've written one show with another person who would do it basically the same way. And if my music didn't in some form match that song in his head, he couldn't accept it. And he's got to be open-minded to hear the song for the first time.
Yeah, I mean, I love responding to that, what he comes up with, because, I always know his music ideas in terms of composition are going to be fresher than anything that I think of. Because yes, a lot of times it'll either be just a tune I make up in my head, or, something that's similar to something else that basically just serves as a placekeeper and reminds me of what the, stresses are and the lyric. As long as what he comes up with still makes sense dramatically for the moment, I'm happy to go back and rewrite everything.
Now, that other show that I spoke about, I'm very pleased with the end result. I think the show turned out tremendous, but he and I said we're not right for each other. Mm-hmm. It's a lot more than, hey, is that a good song?
For sure.
Then again, Gilbert and Sullivan hated each other's guts.
Toward the end, they did indeed. Yeah.
Bill and I, 30 years later, still talk.
And have lunch.
For the two, before we get to Top of the Heap, just what is the process for you? Because, as Richard Rodgers, he worked with Hart and he worked with Hammerstein, and they were completely different ways. One wrote the lyrics and then they did the music, wrote the lyrics and then the music. How is it with you guys? Do you do it in a certain direction, like one writes the lyrics and then give it to the music, or do you, Jeff, sometimes create the music, give it to Bill, or is it kind of just however works?
If I can start it, I think generally I love to have lyrics in front of me, because that gives me an idea of character, their language, their cadence. It's very helpful. And so, it helps me to figure out my way into the music. However, in most shows, there are songs that are not about character. They're about environment. They're about creating an atmosphere. And I love when I start with the music in that moment, and then he responds to that. And who knows where you're going to end up.
Yeah.
But I've found in almost every show we've written and I've written, there are 2-3 numbers that the music or the idea of the music came first.
Yeah, I mean, if especially if it's something in a ballad form, I don't like to other than have some idea about what the moment's about, and maybe even just a lyric hook. I don't like to define that too much for Jeff, because that's all about heart, and I want him to just be able to just explode musically. What's also tricky is, especially when you're dealing with very text-heavy lyrics, it's so hard to keep yourself from getting into like a very boxy shape in terms of lyrics. So it starts getting a little da-dum, 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 da-dum. So it's hard to work against that if you're only working lyrics first. But if you have some sense of what the musical shape is going to be, that is a huge plus, because it prevents you from just falling into the same patterns all the same time.
So now let's get to Top of the Heap, that first show. Tell us a little bit about Top of the Heap and what it is and where it's gone and all that fun stuff.
Well, Top of the Heap was a show that was inspired by these kind of gritty 1950s, I won't say film noir, but very, very edgy kind of pieces like A Face in the Crowd or A Sweet Smell of Success or The Big Knife. Richard Enquist, who was the moderator of BMI at the time, said there were all these pieces that just sounded like, the language we thought sounded so realistic and gritty. And then, of course, he said, but of course it was nothing but. But it had such, style and panache that from a lyric and book writing perspective, I really wanted to play with it. And for Jeff, it just suggested so many cool things musically that really got us going. I don't know if you want to talk about that a little bit, Jeff.
Well, aside from my musical theater gods, George Gershwin being one of them, I loved jazz. I was a jazz player and a rock musician in my former life. And so I was, playing in a lot of bands and playing a lot of styles of music. I understood the power of jazz, and it breaks a lot of the form of musical theater, which is very, very nice. And, so I really glommed on to the idea of it, including that first song I wrote in the cab, which is unlike anything I've ever written before. And really it put its mark on what kind of show this was going to be.
Yeah, very much so.
Musically.
Nice. And so when did Top of the Heap come out? When was that?
We started writing it in 1991. And I think the first real production that we had of it happened,
well, the show was invited by the Dramatists Guild. It was we put it out there, and it was accepted as one of the new works of 1992. So that was our very first reading.
Okay.
And got a great feedback from these wonderful professionals, including Peter Stone and
Martin Charnin was there. I forget who else. Like
Mary Rogers might have been there.
Wow.
And it made us feel like, oh, we're on a real quick path.
Yeah.
And then reality sets in.
Well, tell us about reality, because there's other listeners out here who've written shows and sometimes need the dose of reality.
Well, that was the era of big development. Everybody was getting into, let's develop new shows. And so we went through a series of festivals and concert readings. all over the country. Out in Rockford, Illinois, we did one of our first big readings. That actually ultimately led to a production of a different show. Lots of stuff in New York. At one point, we were chosen for the global search for new musicals over in Cardiff, Wales, which ran for a number of years. And that was a really fun experience because we got to work with West End actors in the show who had amazingly good American accents, I have to say. Occasional word here and there, but man, were they sharp. We got the Director's Choice Award from was it National Alliance for Music Theater, and so we got to do another big reading in New York, and that finally led to the first production at the Gallery Players out in Brooklyn, and they did a beautiful job with it. Very, very short rehearsal period, so we basically just had to slam it up and get it going. And then a couple of other regional productions after that. But yeah, it's a lot of making demos, putting together readings, getting it out there, entering it in everything you possibly could. I mean, what's interesting is the first big festival reading we had was in a festival that was really a play festival. They weren't actually soliciting musicals. For some reason, we'd ended up submitting it. And one of their board members got a hold of it and said, we really have to do this, even though we weren't planning on doing any musicals. And so they rounded up a gentleman who was a head of a big academic theater there because he had a lot of experience doing it. And he was able to put the reading together. And that led to a nice relationship with him and developing Rebels, which was one of our next really big shows.
Nice. So you've got the show under your belt. Let's jump ahead to the mouse because I'm really curious about how that you guys got to do that. So you wrote Doug live, right? So Jeff, how did that come about?
That came about when I had, God bless, yet another reading of a different show, and that Bill was not involved in. And somebody approached me after that reading and asked me if I would go to breakfast with him the next day. And I have never been a part of a power breakfast until that moment. So I met him at a Midtown hotel, and over breakfast, he mentioned he had these friends who were animators and were working on a cartoon called Doug. And would I be interested in applying for the job as composer?
Yeah.
And I said, I've never heard of Doug. Let me ask my collaborator about it. And he had said, is the person whose show I was doing the only person I write with? And I said, no. So I called Bill and I said, have you ever heard of a cartoon named Doug? He said, I watch Doug every day with my son Levi, every day.
And actually, if I could correct one little thing, he said, there's this animated show on Nickelodeon that they want to do it. And I said, oh, is it Doug?
Right. So Bill and I, we joined this process. I believe there were 5 writing teams who were going to submit.
Yeah.
Bill took ideas from the different shows, and we can write this and then we can write this. I think we wrote 3 songs.
Yeah.
We brought in 2 actors to help us present them. Unbeknownst to us, one of the actors was the voice on Doug, was one of the voices on Doug.
Oh, wow.
So when he walked in the room, Jim and David were like, Eddie, what are you doing here? And so it kind of gave us a leg up. We presented, and within the day got the call, would you like to write this?
Wow.
Yeah.
And we wrote it thinking we were writing a Nickelodeon live off-Broadway show.
Huh.
And in the process of writing it, their company was bought out by Disney.
Oh, wow.
And so the project just went poof because they said Disney doesn't do off-Broadway. This was the days of right before Lion King and Beauty and the Beast was going full guns.
Yeah.
And they said, we don't do off-Broadway. But someone in the parks department said, we'll do the show, because they were looking for the synergy between the parks and Disney television.
Wow.
And that's how Doug Live was born.
So for our listeners, tell us what Doug Live was.
Doug Live was a 33-minute show to get people back out to the park that incorporated 5 live actors in different colors, because the characters on Doug were of different colors, and a dog. There was a live actor playing the dog. And aside from those 5, everyone else in the show was animated. So there was interaction between the live actors and the huge animated cast behind them. And the screen, the wall had to be 30 feet high and 60 feet wide. It was stunning.
There were also guest actors selected from the audience that played a couple of characters in one scene too.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's very cool. So Bill, what was it like to see your work in a Disney park? You're sitting there, you're in Disney, and this is your stuff.
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, I'd never had a show and haven't since that involved so much merchandising afterward. I had like the Doug lunchbox, we had Doug action figures, we had Doug keychains, you name it. I mean, it really was exciting because, first of all, what was a little different about the show for Disney was, as we were writing it, at one point we said, well, when are we going to workshop the material? And they were like, workshop? I mean, we usually just go right from, you write it to spending $4 million on it. And we said, well, why don't can we come down and we'll just try it out? So they actually arranged a workshop for us in Walt Disney World in one of their studios down there. And we went down and spent the better part of a week putting it together with some of their performers who were already working on the property. So that alone was a blast, because you walked out of your rehearsal and you were in the middle of Disney World, and you could go on, the rides and eat at, it's in the Italian section or in the Tahitian section, I mean, it was really wild. And then we actually had to put this piece up for Michael Eisner and all of his besuited minions who showed up to see the show. And that alone was an experience, because you could tell the parks people were so nervous about having him come in, down to the fact that they were like cleaning. And at one point I saw a guy with a leveling the thermostat on the wall. Like this was like, it was
wow.
Yeah. And he showed up with probably about 25 other people in suits, and they all sat in this long phalanx. And then we put on our, what you would expect a little workshop of the show was, like 5 actors running around and us, Jeff banging away on the piano and making, sound effects with our mouths. But that all went very well, obviously. And we were able to move on to the production stage. What was really fun was, once the show was up and running, that we were able to go down and see it. Jeff and I flew in to Orlando one day from New York. We caught like the earliest flight in the morning, flew down to Orlando, saw the show. How many times, Jeff? 3 or 4 times?
I probably saw it 3 times before our flight had to leave.
Yeah, so we got to see the show 3 times in a row.
It's
had lunch in the middle.
Minutes long.
Flew home in New York, and we were in bed, by 11 o'clock at night. But we got to experience it with an audience and with all the interactive stuff and all the bells and whistles of the amazing animation that they put into it, and great recorded orchestrations. And it's been a lovely thing over the years, because we hear from people all the time who are either involved in the show or who saw the show and are looking for the music, or have some connection to it in their past. And, Jeff's run into actors at auditions who, looked at his background and were like, oh, Doug Lyne, you wrote Doug Lyne?
I work at a conservatory in New York working with young actors. And one day someone walked in, my new cast member, and he had been smart enough to look up the director and the music director and choreographer he's going to be working with. And unfortunately, most people don't do that, and they really should, to know who you're in the room with. And he saw that I had written Doug live, and he told me in rehearsal that he not only did he see the show a dozen times, it's the show that made him want to be an actor.
Wow.
Which I found so touching. And he's now a producer. He's now on the other side, producing and directing his own shows, which is really wonderful.
That's incredible. The Doug experience must have been just fantastic.
Well, one more memorable thing happened that
Sure.
when we did the workshop for the production, as I mentioned, Michael Eisner was there to see it, and they had slated two things for him to see that night. Our little presentation, and then they were opening this spectacular water-based entertainment thing called Phantasmic, I believe it was called.
Oh, wow.
And he was supposed to see that. And so we were invited to go see the other, thing after we were done with our presentation. So first of all, it was just very cool because you went out into Walt Disney World in the middle of the night. There was nobody there. You got onto trams and we're zipping through the whole park. And we get to this big amphitheater where Phantasmic is. And it's this gigantic show that involved all the Disney villains and this big island that was surrounded by a moat, and all these boats would come around, and there was a giant, paddle wheeler at one point that was filled with Disney villains. And at the end of the show, the mountain opens up and a huge dragon comes out, and Mickey Mouse, dressed, in his Sorcerer's Apprentice garb, comes out and starts to battle with the dragon. And at one point, he goes out and he walks across the water out into the middle of the water and turns and vanquishes the dragon. And this whole thing ends, and we're sitting a couple rows behind Michael Eisner, and he turns around and he's going, I don't know, about having Mickey walking on water is, maybe he could just sort of slosh out or something, because, is anybody here born again? Because I don't want to read about this in the New York Times. Not sure how they ended up resolving that, but
the next day, Mickey did not walk on the water. I was told that. Also, what Bill didn't say is it was a water show. The dragon was all water.
What? Oh my.
It was a stunning show, and it just, things would come up.
Wow.
And so Mickey was on the water slaying the dragon. And the dragon exploded in water, but Mickey had to walk out.
They had a slightly larger budget than we did.
Just a little bit. So let me just jump ahead. So what have you guys been doing lately? Are you working on anything? Has the pandemic, slowed you down, or you've had now time to, connect even virtually? Because like you said, Jeff, you don't necessarily need to be in the same room to work on stuff.
It got in the way of one of our most recent projects. We were asked to write a musical for young audiences based on a picture book called Merrilee Mannerly and Her Magnificent Manners. And the show was developed. We'd done some out-of-town debuts of it at theaters up here in the Northeast. And we're at the point where the producer attached to it wanted to bring it into New York for a run for a while. And that was scheduled to happen in the fall of 2020. Well, obviously, everything was put on hold. We recently heard that it looks like it's back to being scheduled for the fall of this year. So we shall see, if things pan out and the theater comes back into life in New York. But other projects, we toyed with a few things, played around with some stuff for a review that ultimately went a different direction. Jeff's been working on a whole bunch of things that I'm sure he'd like to talk about.
Well, as a music director, I was just involved with Paper Mill Playhouse, which is about to put out a streaming version of a show from 20 years ago off Broadway. They did it there and filmed it.
Oh, wow.
And I was musical director and conductor. So I actually had to act, to get up off the piano, walk with a microphone and talk. And I thought I was going to die. But we'll see. I think it actually comes out today or tomorrow. And
Okay.
we'll see if I look like an idiot. I have another show I've written with an old friend, had a production at the Casa Manana Theater in Fort Worth, Texas, a couple of falls ago. They've asked us to write the sequel to that, which is slated to be the Pinup Girl Christmas is supposed to go down to the Casa Manana this November. I'll believe it when when I'm on the plane going down. And we have to live in optimism.
Yeah.
I've actually never been busier than I've been this last year. And my conservatory work, we just took remote, which is 3 times the work that I do. Instead of a 3 or 4 hour rehearsal in the evening, I'm creating tracks for 9 hours a day. But first of all, I've been paid through this pandemic, which is no small feat, and I'll be forever grateful, and have had a lot of time to write, which is wonderful.
One of the fun things, the pandemic related, that we were able to do was a couple of radio adaptations of earlier shows, like Top of the Heap was one of them. And that was a lot of fun because we were able to combine the show's original demos with new live performances of the book scenes and sort of condensed versions of the show, which was really wild for Top of the Heap because many of the people who had recorded the demos originally came back to play the same roles, 30 years later, and on the radio they could get away with it.
We had a dream cast.
It was a blast. It was like a reunion show.
That's fantastic. I know the pandemic's been obviously terrible, but the things we've been able to take out of it. I was talking to another gentleman yesterday, and there's going to be a musical baby boom for the next few years because everybody's been able to create some stuff because they've had time. So congratulations on being able to find something to do and expand the conservatory and everything that you've done already. So yeah, thank you so much, Bill and Jeff, for coming on. Top of the Heap sounds great. I love playing it on the station. So thank you for letting me do that. All right.
Welcome.
Well, we love what you do too.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Jeff. Bill, I will promote the heck out of your stuff. And if you ever have anything new coming out, you let me know and we will put it on.
I'll send you another show soon.
And if anyone wants to look us up, it's lodinandsquier.com. You can hear samplings of a lot of our works. How many shows are we on? This is, I think, our 9th show together.
Including the most recent one's 9.
Well, we'll definitely be sharing that on our social media and on our website. And things.
Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure.
No problem. All right. We were just speaking with Jeff Lodin and Bill Squier here on Be Our Guest. Tune in next week as we'll be talking to another guest or guests about their life, love, and passion that is musical theater. I am your host, as always, Jean-Paul Jovanov, and I will see you when I see you. We love supporting and promoting the creators of musical theater throughout the world, and we would love to have your support as well. Go to musicaltheaterradio.com and click on the Become a Patron button, because a supportive community is a strong community.